We are back with another item breakdown. This time, decided by popular demand, we are going to be asking the question, is Mystic Reverb a good item in Deadlock? Hey everyone, this is Connor here at Deadlocked, and if you are one of the new subscribers, one, appreciate you. Two, if you haven't watched one of these item breakdowns before, what we do in these breakdowns, we ask 5 questions about several key items in Deadlock. Number 1, what does the item do? Number 2, what heroes should you buy it on? Number 3, what game situations maybe call for this item to be bought? Number 4, is it a core or situational item in Deadlock? And then obviously number 5 at the end, is this a good item? Should you actually be buying it in game? And so today, like I said, we ran a poll on the channel late last night, and Mystic Reverb was the one that won. So let's dive in right away into what does Mystic Reverb do in Deadlock. All right, now taking a look at what exactly Mystic Reverb does, the base stats are actually pretty thin on this one. So obviously this is a 6400 spirit item, so you get a natural spirit investment, a spirit power boost from buying this, the pure investment obviously. But it only gives you 15% spirit lifesteal. So the question is, why is this a 6400 item? Is this good? What does it do? The passive is really where the interesting part comes in with this item. So the passive is every 6.25 seconds. You can imbue an ability to slow on a hit target and deal an additional percentage of the damage dealt to enemies around the target after a short delay. Okay, so there's a lot there. So every 6.25 seconds, this can happen, where an imbued ability, so you would pick an ability. I'm on Viscous. Splatter would be probably the ability I would be choosing here, right? That will deal an additional percentage of the damage dealt to enemies around the target after a short delay. So 50% of the damage that you would deal with Splatter normally, it gets dealt around you in a 16-meter radius. You can see that number kind of right below the damage percentage conditional. There's a 3-second delay on this happening, and then it also applies a 40% movement slow. So this is a tricky item to use. We're going to talk about some heroes and game situations to use it in, but this is basically something that gives you a little bit of an AoE boost to the damage you're dealing with an ability. You need that ability to already be dealing a lot of damage itself, because this is a percentage damage addition. And also you need an ability that would benefit from hitting enemies in a kind of in a closed area, like in a circle or something, like in a combined area. And then obviously you're applying movement slow as well. So let's take a look quickly at what heroes you might want to buy Mystic Reverb on. All right, so as we talk about Mystic Reverb, I feel like we have to acknowledge that this is at least somewhat simplistic item. You really don't need to check a lot of boxes in order to get benefit from Mystic Reverb, at least in my opinion. You need an ability that deals heavy spirit damage. You need one that you can use on a cooldown roughly every 6-7 seconds. You want to be obviously proccing the Mystic Reverb cooldown as often as you reasonably can. So a somewhat spammable ability, but not like every second, obviously, right? And you need this on a hero that is looking to maybe contain or slow down enemies, deal damage. So, like I said, there's not a lot of like strict qualifiers for this. I feel like you can make the case for several heroes. So I'm obviously on Viscous right now. It's a hero that I play a decent bit. And I have a Splatter build we're going to talk about later in this video, where this is a really core component of that build, is having Mystic Reverb on it. And Splatter, if you're trying to max it, really is complemented like an item like Mystic Reverb. However, there's a lot of other heroes you can do, right? There's a case to be made. You could have a Bebop Mystic Reverb build with Bomb. That one would be a little bit tricky. Doorman with the bell, though, the call bell, could be really, really effective with this. Dynamo with the biggest Wog build I have seen with his Stomp. Mystic Reverb is a really nice complement to that, because obviously it's something around that cooldown. I'm not sure exactly what the cooldown is of Stomp right away. But I know once you level it up, it can fall right into that category as well. Grey Talon with Arrow. I mean, like I said, we can pretty easily go down the list here. You could probably make a case for a holiday build with the barrels. Potentially, I feel like, Ivy with Kudzu, maybe Geist with Grenade. I feel like Lash. I feel, you know what I mean? Like this is one of those items that, because of its simplicity, there's a lot of value you can get from it. And I guess the other part of this item that we have to at least consider somewhat is that there is spirit lifesteal baked in. So I feel like most characters are okay with having some spirit lifesteal. It also does make it really nice for a character like Geist, though, to have. This is, in theory, an item that you could rush alongside like a Radiant Regen to give you some sustain, and then even some more lifesteal off of your spirit that way. Not exactly sure how viable those two would be together, but that's at least a theory you could run with, right? There's so many heroes that you could run this item on. I feel like at 7 at different points, potentially a Shiv with like a knife proc or something. Warden, maybe if you were doing like a, that would be like a weird all flask build, but like there is some potential there for you to do that. Pocket, I guess, could potentially run it as well. He has kind of a set item kit, it feels like, though, so it's hard to sometimes deviate from that with him. All in all, though, it feels like Mystic Reverb is one of those items that is somewhat blank slate because it has a use case that is so applicable to just about every hero in Deadlock. Almost every hero in Deadlock would love a little delayed AoE burst at the end of one of their abilities that they use every 6-7 seconds. So we're going to look a little bit more in depth into this, but in general, I would say if you're running a hero that has an ability that you find yourself kind of funneling into, focusing first, that is spirit damage dealing and triggers in between that like 5 to 8 second range, it could even be a little bit give and take there, I would really consider slotting Mystic Reverb in your next game. But let's look at some game situations where I've personally used this, or at least I've seen it, and let's break it down. All right, so I thought we'd dive into a game where I actually used Mystic Reverb on Viscous. I was just talking about this. I was doing a splatter build and was funneling heavily into Spirit, as you can see. But I want to talk about in this game why I actually don't know if it was the right call for me to buy this item. We're going to look at what some of the enemy heroes have. We'll look at what I was doing and why I feel like you can kind of see here my numbers in this game weren't exactly amazing. And I feel like this is partially because of user error on my part and crafting a build that just did not fit the game. So let's kind of break down how Mystic Reverb fit into all this. So the build, very simply, is funneling splatter. You rush tier 5 splatter. I've got the build we'll talk about here in a second. Radiant Regen I actually added in as kind of like a way to provide some self-healing, but otherwise, everything is aimed at making splatter bigger, hit harder, and use it more often. That's kind of the very simple idea of this build. The question is, was this a good idea? Let's talk about laning to start. So I had a Holiday with me, was doing great. We were going up against Victor Vindicta. Vindicta was flying quite a bit in lane, and it was very annoying for me to try and hit splatters. I probably should have, in the early part of this game, gone way more into Cube, and maybe even Puddle Punch to try and just like be annoying with, off the higher walls and surfaces that I could punch the Vindicta, right? The other reason, though, is when we get into the mid game, and also hitting Lash with anything in Viscous' kit is hard, so that's just tough. And Viscous' gun is also not good for hitting Vindicta, so laning was just a problem here, even despite what the numbers might show you. The other thing, though, is I should have probably done a little bit of an inventory of where the game was at and where my team was going, because we are a really spirit-heavy team outside of Billy and Holiday. And what did the enemy team do? What most smart Deadlock players should do, and most of them bought some kind of spirit resistance. So that might be spirit shielding, nothing necessarily there. Spirit resilience, enchanters, spirit resilience. Okay, so 4 of their players have an item that is not a direct counter to anything. Like, you can still run spirit into that item, obviously, but it's going to be targeting the damage that I'm trying to deal, which is no fun. So, should I have bought it here? Is this actually a game situation where it calls for it? I would actually say no. I think this was a misplay by me to just like run into a game saying I'm going to play a certain build and then play it no matter what. Sometimes I'm just trying to test a build, though, and that's just kind of the way it falls. But if I were really, really evaluating this game and kind of trying to coach this player, me, I would say look for what your role actually is in this game. Probably should have gone more hybrid to give some of the, pressure off of the spirit resilience picks. Leaned more into Cube early, and honestly probably leaned more into Cube throughout the game. Maybe even gone for like an initiator. We don't have a huge frontline presence here. So me being kind of that frontliner alongside Billy and maybe Calco flanking could have been a good call, maybe going for Goo Ball more. But in general, this item I feel like was just okay in this game. And so I don't know if I would recommend buying it necessarily in this situation, but I feel like it's important to take a look at when it's good, when it's not. If you see a lane like this and you're playing a build that requires a spirit hit, like the biggest Wog for Dynamo, for example, if his stomp build, if you're playing it into this lane, could feel similarly tough. There's a lot of situations like that, so just be aware of your lane and your game situation before throwing an item like Mystic Reverb into the build, regardless. And also, I think I bought it fairly late in the game, so don't judge this number too harshly here. But these are the damage numbers for my game at the end of the game. Splatter obviously being number 1, Tank Buster putting in serious work. If you know Tank Buster, you know that is very common for that item to just go crazy. Goo Ball doing damage a little bit, but Mystic Reverb only down at 2% with 461 damage. So I think, like I said, I bought this one really, really late, but because of the delay in proccing and the difficulty to hit, you can see why I was a little bit questionable about using this item in game. But let's take a look now. Is this a core or a situational item in Deadlock? Just kidding. Before we do that, I want to show you, I bought the actual build from that last game, and I kind of want to show you all just what it looks like as far as the timings are concerned. I don't feel like this is a horrible build. If you are going into a better game situation, maybe you pilot it a little bit better. Sorry. But this is actually, just a little bit of a showcase of what Splatter looks like and the timing, so we use it. You see all the cooldowns proccing there. So Mystic Reverb just comes off cooldown there. 6 seconds left on the Splatter. Surge of Power about to come off. Tank Buster about halfway. So this is actually one I could use Splatter again and would be able to proc it again. Splatter's a little bit longer of a cooldown, actually, and I already actually have that maxed out as well, so you have the minus 6 second cooldown there. So a little bit longer than I would like, but I feel like if you're just splitting hairs for a few seconds, you can still get plenty of value out of Reverb on an ability like Splatter. All right, so is Mystic Reverb a core situational item? Well, as always, it really depends on kind of the build you're going for and what you want out of the item within the build. So since we're talking about Viscous and Splatter, I feel like we talked about it a lot in this video. We'll look at this build really quickly. I'll look at some others as well. But in this one, this is a pretty core item. I mean, this is a part of just making Splatter as deadly as you can and having as much destruction associated with it as possible. This is also, Spirit Burn is another option here, another item we could probably talk about in one of these videos. Boundless, Echo Shard, Mercurial, etc. So all of this is built off the back of getting your Splatter to be as deadly as possible. So in this build, I think I would call this a core item. But you could also probably make the case that it's maybe a lower priority core item than building up some of the other things. A Boundless might be more important here than Mystic Reverb, honestly. Spirit Lifesteal flat, if that's all the actual benefit you're getting from the item, can feel pretty bad. Whereas with Boundless, obviously you're getting a ton of spirit power, bonus health, and some regen, obviously building off a few items previous to it. It also is a nice item that builds. Spirit Burn could be another one you look for. Is ability range and that 20-second passive cooldown better or worse in the situation than Reverb? That's a question that just kind of comes down to the individual. Maybe we'll do some comparison videos later, kind of comparing similarly bought items, who knows. But so on a build like this, where you have a very singular goal of maximizing damage on an item, like we said, that's doing spirit damage, all the things that Reverb is doing, I would call this a core item. There's a couple other builds like it, but let's take a look at one where it's a little bit more on the fringe. All right, so what we've got on screen now is actually a healing grenade build. I actually tried to run this recently on Kelvin. This is a Kelvin build, obviously. Where your focus is kind of twofold. You're trying to provide a lot of healing, and you're trying to use your grenade to obviously deal as much damage as possible as well. This is where I feel like this item is in this section. Stage 3 becomes stronger, but I feel like in this section even, it's a little bit of a situational item. I think the focus of this build is solid healing. It's like the stage 2 and a lot of these green items up here. There's a piece of this where you do need these spirit items, like Improved Spirit, Cooldown, Tank Buster. I feel like these are really kind of the heart of the build, truly. Transcendent Cooldown gets into that territory as well. But I feel like this is a situation where you might want to look at these 4 items over a Mystic Reverb. This is having you obviously imbue it on Grenade. I think there's debates to be had about where you're using it, but Grenade obviously has the multiple charges later in the game, so you can kind of guarantee you're getting that Mystic Reverb proc off, which can be really nice. I mean, the Mystic Slow, in terms of what you're doing as Kelvin, is really valuable. Kelvin is like a, support, spirit, healer, kind of amalgamation of a character, right? It provides a ton of utility for the team with Ice Path, Dome, and if you could have your grenades not only heal your allies, but also do damage and be able to do that slow to a big area, your grenades all of a sudden become this huge, huge utility piece that you can use for a lot of different things. So I would say that this item being core here is fair, but I feel like when you start to talk about it being on the fringe, that's where I feel like it gets to that point in the conversation, right? Because this build is not just designed around Grenade being the absolute killer and Stormbringer for your team, right? I feel like Grenade is a utility piece here, and Reverb really helps with kind of the utility angle of it versus just pure raw damage. I hope that makes sense, but this is where I feel like we're talking about Viscous and Kelvin because the two of them have similar roles on a team. And although Mystic Reverb is a 6400 spirit item, I feel like a lot of times you're looking to buy it on a more utility kind of character because of the slow primarily that it provides. That 40% movement slow is so like utility, just kind of like, I don't know, it's very annoying. So give it to the annoying characters to use, basically. Viscous and Kelvin being really good examples of that. But in any case, we finally have to ask the question, is this a good item in Deadlock? Let's break it down. According to StatLocker on the latest patch, Mystic Reverb has a 6.2% buy rate, and a 57.9% win rate, making it one of the highest items. So, even though with that low of a buy rate, is Mystic Reverb a good item in Deadlock? Well, I think the win percentages would tell us yes. I would say maybe. I think this item really, any item with a contingency like this has, you have to be putting it on an ability, and you have to be hitting that ability, obviously. And then to get the benefit of the AoE, you have to have enemies around the one that you hit to further proc it. Obviously, the slow on just the single enemy is good, but doing that in an AoE is really the value of that item. So you want the splash to have some value in terms of also just damage, right? This item can go crazy. I am convinced that this is a really powerful item, but I would use it, like I mentioned towards the end of what I was just talking about, I would really think of Mystic Reverb more as a utility spirit item than a raw damage output spirit item. I feel like if you want the raw damage output, you would probably go for like a spirit burn or a boundless spirit. Covered up part of those abilities, apologies. But yeah, so I would say in general, I think Mystic Reverb is a good item. It certainly provides something interesting, even though it is simple. Like there's not a lot of text here. I think most people can read this item and figure out generally what it does. I think even though that is the case, it doesn't mean it's a bad item. It doesn't mean you can't use it a whole lot. It doesn't mean it can't be dominant in your Deadlock games. So at the end of the day, let me know what you all think of this item in the comments. Are there any heroes I missed on the breakdown? Obviously, there probably are, but where have you used this item? Kind of what are your versions of my takes? I'm super genuinely interested to hear those in the comments. But as always, thank you all so much for the support. The recent videos have been going crazy. I have a ton of gratitude for what we've been seeing on the channel. It's really cool. I just am like very taken aback by it. So genuinely, thank you all so much. And from our house to yours, we'll see you all next time here at Dead Unlocked.